Hello, class. So we're going to continue talking about the actual French Revolution once it's gotten into motion. So a pretty common thing that is asked in the United States for opinion polling is, do you think the country is on the right track? Okay, is it right or wrong track? And it's very rare for Americans, the majority, to say the country's on the right track, no matter who's in charge. But if you have that ability to poll France in 1789, you would find very few people that thought that France was on the right track. However, everyone thought the status quo was terrible, but they didn't agree on what the solutions are to fix it, what the problem was. Okay? There were people that thought that the decadence of the king and queen was them straying from traditional Christian values, and they should have to double down and be more loyal to God, specifically Catholics, right? Good Catholics. There were people that were saying the church has an enormous amount of power in France. They become all corrupt. We need to get all influence of the church out, right? Those people would both say France is on the wrong track. They don't agree. So it's not last time. Is the Estates General turns into the National Assembly, and they're going to start passing their own laws and basically force the king into being a constitutional monarch. But those people on the street. And mobs in Paris are going to, for large parts of the French Revolution, be an incredibly effective tool. Paris is the largest city in France, and it's the one that has this big urban poor population. So we have the storming of the Bastille. So the Bastille is what's pictured here. Okay? And this is this medieval fortress that had previously held political prisoners. Okay? So it's like this very good analogy to the French kingdom of the Middle Ages. It's in the middle of Paris. Well, in Paris, there's food shortages and there's high prices. And there's also rumors. Okay? Rumors cause problems. The king would attack with thousands of troops. And so this ended up creating crowds in Paris. These crowds were searching for ammunition and weapons. And they stormed the Bastille, suspecting it of containing gunpowder. And they let many prisoners out. Okay? And this is shown at the time as being this big thing against the king. But most of these were not political prisoners. They were not people that were in jail because they criticized the king. There were people there, many of them that were pickpockets. They were petty thieves or creeps that had harassed women that were in there. And they show up and they tell them to let in, and there's just one garrison there, and a story is about a guy getting his head ripped off, defending it. And they still Bastille Day in France today. It's this big celebration. It's somewhat similar to the 4th of July, and how it's celebrated, parades, things like fireworks. But again, for the most part, this was petty thieves. Now, King Louis is trying to make the situation better. So he went to Paris and acknowledged the revolutionary flag, the tricolor. Okay, so the colors of the French flag are each associated with liberty, equality, and fraternity. So I teach out of Iowa, and our flag is the French flag, except it's got the state seal on it. But this is that tricolor flag. So we're going to see all these changes happening at once. Okay, so people have these different reactions. So we have the Great Fear. So the king's authority would only be recognized by most towns if the National Assembly approved it. And so in the spring of 1789, peasants started revolting over the price of bread, and these rural protests led to the Great Fear. They'd seen what the peasants had done in Paris. And that's the thing about these unequal societies is that there's always more of the peasants than there are the elites. So with the numbers game, it's bad news. And these areas of social control, the monarchy and the church, these are signs fading away. So rumors that the king and nobles were sending the military to attack peasants, pillage the land, and put down the revolt. And so the peasants are taking preemptive action. There are people that are turning against their landowners. Okay? The fear that the peasants are going to revolt, in some cases, lead to the peasants revolting. All right, so we have the August decrees. These are the members of the Patriot Party. So there's the nobles who want to change, propose serfdom be banned. So we talked about previously in class, but serfdom was the type of peasants that you had in the Middle Ages, where they were tied to the land and you were tied to a master. But it wasn't slavery. You weren't bought and sold. You're tied to the land, and your lord had certain responsibilities such as protection for you. But serfdom will be abolished. The National Assembly abolishes the feudal system entirely. And they're going to go further than people are expecting. Ties to the Catholic Church are removed. Today, people might give 10% of their money to church. And that's their own business, right? They can make that. They say, this is a good use of my money. Okay? In France, this was enforced, that your tax money was going to the church. That's gone. And then all citizens can be eligible for any civil or military office. This is going to help the French military because before it wasn't based on merit. It was based on who your father was. And so you could have never had someone like Napoleon Bonaparte move up the ranks. His father simply wasn't a big enough noble for him to get the right things. Lots of changes happen very quickly. We have the Declaration of the Rights of Man by the National Assembly. This calls to the end of the absolute monarchy, for representative government, for freedom, equality to all, freedom of the press. And they want a constitution, okay? And a written constitution like the United States has had. There's the political ones, and we still have the unrest, right? In October 5th, we have the Women's March to Versailles, in which the women upset about the price of bread are going to march from Paris to Versailles. Okay, as you see in this depiction, they have weapons, they have cannons, and they go there. And it's a really interesting event because initially you have the king come out, and Louis goes and he tries to charm the woman, and you think that would end with his downfall, but the story is a woman fainting at how charming he was. So he kind of thinks it's done, but it's not, and it kind of has to be put down by the military after this. But as you can see, this is where we're going back and forth. There are the regular people who are revolting over things that are simply like, we want to be able to live our lives peacefully. We want to be able to buy bread without it costing an arm and a leg. And then there are people in the National Assembly that have higher ideals. They're thinking more philosophically. Okay, so there's like these two levels to the revolution. Now, there's an anti-clericalism aspect of this, where the Catholic Church was so closely tied to the monarchy that when people became anti-monarchy, they started being against the church. So we get a thing called the Civil Constitution of the Clergy, in which they are going to make it so that the clergy, so the priest, the monks, the bishops, are going to be less tied to the church. Of course, the Pope objects to this. It's the idea that you would take an oath of loyalty to the new Republican government, and the government would pay for your salary. But you have to swear this loyalty. And this is counter to the Catholic system, And so about 24% of the French clergy take the oath, the rest refuse. And because they remove those tithes, they're not getting paid, right? If you want to take that, what they consider a moral stance, you're not going to get paid. So things aren't going very well. And Marie Antoinette is related to the Austrian royal family. Okay? Her mother is Empress of Austria. And so they attempt to escape. Okay, called the Flight to Rennes, where they're going to try to escape into Austria, and he's going to ask his brother-in-law, the Emperor of Austria, to come in with his troops, put down this French Revolution, and restore them to the monarchy. And of course, they get found out before they can escape the country. And because they get found out, it's no longer safe to keep them around. And so Marie Antoinette is going to be the target of all these new newspapers writing bad things about them. Okay? And this is where we get this wrongly attributed quote to her. People have no bread, let them eat cake. Something that she obviously never said, but it sounded believable because that was kind of her mentality. So the king was already kind of powerless, but both the king and Antoinette were under house arrest. And eventually the National Assembly is going to just vote to get rid of the king altogether. They're going to hold national elections. Okay? And immediately people break themselves up into these different groups. So in this election, we actually have the data for it. Getting a small majority are going to be the group under Carnot, who would be the centrist. Okay. Robespierre, which would under the left, he get 200 seats, and Broussel, the right, getting 160 seats. Our left-right political spectrum actually comes from the French Revolution. This idea of being left or right has to do with how monarchist you are versus how Republican you are in this sense. And so the more sympathetic you are to the monarchy, the more to the right you are versus left. And eventually, Louis is considered too much of a risk. So on January 21st, 1793, he is going to be executed by guillotine. Later, Marie Antoinette will also have her head cut off. This is going to upset the other monarchies in Europe, and they're going to start the War of the First Coalition, in which most of Europe declares war on France.